I'm Mark Fraunfelder. I'm the editorial director here at IFTF. I am super excited to have all of you join us today to discuss this topic, foresight in cybersecurity, a scenario planning approach for managing digital security. Our agenda for today is a short welcome and a roundup of what's happening at IFTF, and then we'll have a conversation with Steve, and then we'll follow that with a chunk of time to take questions from all of you here today. I'll explain how to do that in a bit, but go ahead and keep your questions coming using the Q&A button on your panel there. So just go ahead and if you have a question at any time, add it, and then we'll get to them later on. This is being recorded, and we will send it to everyone who registered within a week. For people who are new here, I'd like to welcome you to Institute for the Future. We're the world's leading futures organization. We were founded over 50 years ago in 1968, and we had a mission of helping people think about the future so that they can make better decisions in the present. We conduct research, we offer education and experiences to help people frame new actions in the present. And here you see a photo from a fashion show that we had a few years ago, Climate Ready Haute Couture for the year 2030. And here's just a quick overview of our Foresight training portfolio. This is where we teach people about the tools and methods to think about the future in a systematic way. I'm not going to go into detail here, but you can see our courses for individuals, like our flagship Foresight Essentials training, design futures, scenario building, and our online self-paced, self-guided courses on Coursera, and really a wide variety of custom trainings for teams and organizations. And we have some great trainings coming up. One of them is a really fun fast futures class, and this is a 90-minute intro with Jane McGonigal. That's taking place on October 6th. And then we have 2 in-person trainings coming up, which is really great that we're starting to do these again. One of them is in July and one is in October. We'd really love to host you for 3 days in our office in sunny, beautiful Palo Alto, California. It will include breakfast and lunch and a happy hour at our incredible emerging media lab, where you'll get to see some cool AR and VR stuff. And then in October, we'll also be doing a Foresight Essentials training in Munich, Germany. We also have a ton of free Foresight learning resources. Ask a Futurist webinar. You get to meet IFTF staff, ask them questions. Urgent Optimist community platform, which is a private social network for futurists, and it includes a monthly scenario club, Signal Scavengers Hunt, online courses. And this one is a great offering for people who are just getting interested in foresight. It's the only item here that costs a very small fee of $10 a month or $99 a year. And it's a great way to get involved and meet other people who are excited about the future. We have things like Futures Buddy Matches. We'll match you up with another person interested in exchanging ideas about the future. We have a great monthly Foresight Essentials newsletter. It's free and it shares practical tips and insights and has really great practical essays, a great monthly newsletter. And then we have Foresight practitioner meetups that are monthly meetings that are exclusive to IFTF Foresight training alumni. And you can find out about all of this stuff at iftf.org. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the way we're going to do this presentation today. I'm sure since we've been into this pandemic for over 2 years, most of you are already familiar with Zoom or similar video conferencing services. Just a reminder, when you are making comments, to select everyone so that everyone can see them, unless you want to just send a direct message to somebody. But otherwise, just make sure it's saying that it is going to everyone. In fact, I'm going to do that right now myself. Secondly, please ask questions using the Q&A feature instead of chat, because otherwise it could just get lost in the mix. And also you can upvote other questions if you think someone has asked a really interesting question, you want to make sure that Steve has a chance to get to it. And remember, go ahead and just ask questions anytime you want in that little section. Okay, well, that's it for the housekeeping. So without further delay, allow me to introduce you to our guest, Steven Weber. Steve is one of the world's foremost expert practitioners of scenario planning. He's worked with more than 50 organizations to develop this discipline as a strategy planning tool in for-profit, nonprofit, and government settings. As a partner at Breakwater, Steve brings a research-based innovation discipline to strategy and decision-making around the most complex challenges facing people and organizations. He's also professor at the School of Information and Department of Political Science at UC Berkeley. In 2015, he founded the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley, where for 7 years, he led a multidisciplinary research program on emerging digital security issues at the intersection of new technologies, human behavior, and risk calculations made by arms and governments. Steve, welcome. I'm so excited to have you join us.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for the opportunity. And let me just add my own pitch for IFTF's resources and trainings and stuff like that. Over the years, it's been a huge inspiration and learning experience for me to interact with IFTF on a kind of a now and again basis. The work you guys do is fantastic and so valuable. So thanks for doing this as well.
Oh, thanks so much, Stephen. And it's an honor that you say that. Yeah, I just want to jump right into this. I mean, things are moving so quickly in the world of cybercrime. Whenever I listen to the Leo Laporte podcast, Security Now, it's just like 2 hours of frankly, overwhelmingly terrifying information about these cyber threats that are just coming fast and furious like a fire hose. Can you like talk me off a cliff here? I'm like, yeah. What is it that in the world of cyber threats that organizations should be aware of?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Mark. I'm not going to talk you off the cliff per se, although I am going to suggest that some of the kind of fatalistic, catastrophic cybercrime, people have used the phrase, I'm sure you've heard, cyber Pearl Harbor, you know, the kind of iconic image of the single catastrophic attack that brings the world to a halting stop. I'm not actually sure that that is really the most constructive way for people, whether they are lay people or people in security organizations or people in government organizations trying to think about digital security to see this problem. I think that when you take a step back, there are some foundational cracks in the way we built a digital economy on top of insecure infrastructure. There is a lot of danger and risk out there, but some of the catastrophic thinking, I think in some cases leads to almost like paralysis. And yet here we are, you know, the world goes on. So I'm sure we'll dig into some of the kind of parameters around what people can sort of reasonably try to assess and how you kind of think about risk management. But I just did want to say that you know, it's very, very easy to look at the numbers, breach notification fatigue, and just kind of be overwhelmed by how scary the internet has become in many respects.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, listening to that podcast, it's just like, oh my God, if someone wants to breach your organization or your personal account, it's really, I feel like there's not a lot you can do to prevent it, or am I like being too pessimistic?
I think it's a little bit like, you know, it's a little bit like some sports. Like if you're playing the New England Patriots or something, you know, with Tom Brady as quarterback, they're going to score some points on you, you know, and no matter how good your defense is, they're going to score some points on you. And so you build your game plan around the idea that, in fact, you're going to have to score more points back in order to win the game. Now, that's not, I'm not in that context. I don't want to be taken to say like we're talking about hackbacks or active defense or anything of that sort. But I do think the kind of underlying view that you should generally assume, whether you're an individual or a reasonably resourced organization, or frankly, even a very well-resourced organization, it's reasonable to assume that there are cracks in your armor. It's reasonable to assume that those cracks are or will be exploited at some point, and then you build your risk management profile around that assumption. I think the danger is when people like you and me or Citibank or the US government believes somehow that it's got a perimeter up in which it can control the flow of data in and out. It knows who's taking that data in and out, and that there won't be an attack or a breach. That kind of like overconfidence is probably the single most dangerous thing we have in the digital security environment. Now, having said that, the other point I want to make, it's painfully obvious, but I think it's, and people hear it all the time, but I think it's really profound, is again, both as an individual and as an organization, the value of basic digital hygiene is massive. Like the saying is, and I'm sure everybody's heard this, you don't have to outrun the bear, you only have to outrun the other person. Which is another way of saying, don't make it easy on people who want to steal your data or manipulate your data or otherwise damage you in a digital environment. Don't make it easy on them. Make it hard on them.
Which I think leads to my next question. What's your approach at Breakwater when you work with organizations to generate cybersecurity foresight?
Yeah. So, Mark, it really started when I launched into the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity in 2015. My first instinct was to go around and do a kind of listening tour and ask people throughout, the kind of spectrum of organizations, government, nonprofit, for-profit, and so on and so forth, what was keeping them up at night and what their experience was trying to manage digital security of portfolios. And what I came away from that experience with was a sense, and I want to be really clear that I'm quite sympathetic and empathetic to this sense, that like a lot of security organizations were running around operating a little bit like emergency room physicians. In other words, they went to work in the morning, and whatever crisis came in the door that day, they would try to fix or patch it up, send it back out into the world for some kind of longer term public health intervention or disease management or something like that, and just kind of like then deal with the next crisis that comes in the emergency room door by an ambulance and stuff like that. And they were always running faster to try to stay in the same place. And that sadly, there really was nobody outside the emergency department who was dealing with those longer term vulnerabilities, sort of causing all those crises to enter the door. And again, this is not a criticism of people in the security world. It's actually kind of an awareness of the speed, intensity, and the challenge under which they operate. And so I thought, like, the world doesn't really need yet another research organization working on like how do we improve that emergency room dynamic. What we need is to kind of, in addition to that, is kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, can we realistically try to foresee just a little bit over the horizon and not ignore the threats we're dealing with today, ransomware, for example, but look out maybe 2-3 years ahead and say, what are the kinds of threats that are likely to be on the horizon 2-3 years from now? And can we do things now so that we can bolster our understanding of those threats, bolster our defense against those threats, so that when 2-3 years from now, when that day comes, we won't be looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying, why didn't we see this coming? And why didn't we act on it? So I'll give you, kind of a very kind of timely example. Many of the largest platforms now are grappling with the question of how might they deal with data requests that are connected to abortion or anti-abortion activists. it feels like, this is something that could have been foreseen, and I think reasonably should have been foreseen 2 to 3 years ago. The risk that the Supreme Court would act as it did, the risk that companies that held sensitive data might find themselves suddenly in the kind of crosshairs of that problem, that was foreseeable a couple of years ago. And yet you have the sense that very few people gave significant foresight and thought to what would we do if this were to happen, and what capabilities and kind of competencies and kind of just organizational processes and perhaps relationships with law enforcement do we need to build now, so that if it were to happen, we're not sort of catching up to the present. And look, I mean,
Right.
I don't have to convince you, that's what foresight's all about, right? So that's what we were trying to do. And that's what we continue to try to do.
And so you're thinking like an app that someone might use to track menstruation cycles or something like that. Then there's a database there of people who are entering whether, they're having their period or not. And that could be subpoenaed by a state government or something.
Yeah, or sensitive location data. Yeah, so again, right now, you worry a lot about law enforcement requests and how the platforms might deal with that. But don't forget about the hacktivists who will try to steal that data regardless of whether or not law enforcement gets legitimate access to it. And so, it sounds a little bit catastrophic, but there are very smart digital hacktivists on the right and left side of the political spectrum. And I think you can expect to see a war between them, kind of almost like congeal onto what I'll call this kind of, cultural and legal war we're now facing in the United States around sexual and reproductive rights. So like these things are, again, a little bit foreseeable, modelable. And if you can't, I like to think about it this way, if you don't foresee it, you can't possibly make a decision to do anything about it in advance.
Yeah. You mentioned ransomware, which I think is probably a growing problem. And so, looking 2 to 3 years out with a foresight lens, is ransomware still the major thing to be concerned about, or do you see other kinds of cyber crime and cyber threats looming on the horizon that organizations should start to prepare for today?
Yeah, I do, Mark. I mean, it's, I think what we've learned is that like the past never quite goes away, just new things kind of pile on top of it and attention falls off of it. So look, ransomware, people use ransomware because it works. And the cat and mouse kind of race around ransomware and the financing of ransomware and all that kind of stuff will continue. But one of the areas that kind of going back actually really to the scenarios that we did at CLTC in 2015, so we're now talking 7 years ago, that I think is starting to sort of become far more visible on our horizon, just over the next 1 to 2 years, and people are starting to talk about it now, although I wish they'd been talking about it a couple of years ago, is the value to digital attackers in both assessing and perhaps manipulating what we think of as, and what we talked about as, emotion data. So strap on your Oculus headset, and I don't mean to be picking on a particular company. It isn't just going to be Meta that's going to be collecting this data. And you have access to people's pupil dilation. Certainly, some of the wearables that we use have access to your kind of dynamic heart rate on a kind of 24/7 basis. You might have skin temperature, galvanic skin response, and stuff like that. And it becomes pretty plausible to gather, as well as from the speed of someone's voice and the tone of their voice, an awful lot of information about their emotional state at that moment. If you think about it from a decision maker, if you're trying to manipulate, change, or even predict someone's future decisions in a stressful situation of one kind or another, it isn't, it isn't conceptually, it's not a tremendously challenging problem to combine those data sets and learn a lot about the emotional state that a person is in. I'm sure you and I both know that this is commonly done in earnings calls for large companies as they kind of report their earnings. Hedge funds and other big banks are like kind of trying to measure the stress in a CFO's voice as she tells, you know, a kind of a community of analysts about her projections for the next quarter. If it's done legitimately, it can probably be done even more effectively illegally by stealing data that you might not otherwise get on that person's emotional state. And without, again, getting catastrophic, you can start to imagine the kinds of things that become possible when I, as the attacker, may understand your emotional state at this moment better than you even do.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, even, you know, a number of years ago, not even with a VR headset, I was reading that you can just have a regular webcam video feed and you can detect a person's pulse rate just by like little, you know, the variations in the pixels around the arteries in the neck. And that could be an indication of a person's stress level.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that that's, I think I've read papers showing that that's doable. Whether it's doable at scale is a separate question. But yeah, for sure. And look, it would not surprise me in the 2024, it won't happen in the 2022 midterms, but in the 2024 presidential elections, and I think we actually talked about this in 2015 in our scenarios, that presidential candidates would be essentially graded on their measured emotional response in all sorts of different settings, whether it be in debates or stump speeches or so on and so forth. And that would become part of sort of the electoral canvas, as it were, on which people make decisions. You know, remember it was the Hillary Clinton ad, actually, back from the 2012 election when she was running against Barack Obama, if I got the dates right. And it was the, you know, who do you want to pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the morning? And the idea was, well, here you have this experienced, I probably got the dates wrong. That probably was not the campaign in which she ran that ad. But it was an ad about, like, you know, I'm a practiced decision maker who can manage the stress of an international crisis. Well, you know, if you want to test that proposition, stealing or accessing in sort of, you would think, illegitimate ways, largely a bunch of data about that person's emotional reaction to various stressful situations would inform a lot of what you might want to know, whether that be, again, legitimate. You're trying to prove to the world that, hey, I'm cool as a cucumber in these stressful situations, or an attack ad by someone who wants to shit. So, you know, this person gets panicky and freaks out when they're in high stress decision situations. That would affect my voting.
Yeah,
I don't want a president who gets freaked out in high stress situations. I want somebody who can just kind of handle that stuff with very, very little drama.
Yeah. It also makes me think, you know, just to my mind, an organization could have, you know, quote unquote, bulletproof technology to keep their sensitive information secure, but it is just, you know, one careless member of an organization can open the door for a crippling breach. And if you're able to, like, look at the emotional states of people within an organization and, like, wait for a tempting time to target that person, that is like, I guess my question is kind of, you know, careless staffers, is that like a bigger problem than the technology itself?
Yeah. Well, we're all human beings, and we all have moments, I mean, at least I do, where I'm rushing through things or trying to multitask or something like that. And that kind of distraction is obviously the enemy of good security practices. Now, at the same point, let's acknowledge, you know, human beings are human beings, and nobody gets excited about, like, wow, I can't wait to do my two-factor authentication today, you know? So in some sense, technology has not done quite enough to make it easier for human beings to be human beings. We've learned a lot about what it takes. You know, if you think about, for example, the kinds of security warnings you now get on your browser when you're going to a website that you probably, you know, that your browser can't authenticate. The font, the image, the color, all of those things are finely tuned now to a fair amount of empirical data about what actually gets people, you know, catches their attention, gets them to slow down a little bit, say, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't do that. The default settings, you know, you'll notice now, for at least in Chrome, are go back is the default choice, not the go forward. And so you're sort of forcing someone to make the harder choice to do something that enhances their risk rather than reduces their risk. This kind of stuff, this kind of, you call it social engineering, call it user interface design, whatever, really, really important part of the cyber hygiene equation. But at the end of the day, Mark, I mean, you said it right. People like you and me and everybody else, we're just humans, and we need to also take a little bit more responsibility. It's going to have to be a shared kind of game between the technology designers, the risk managers, and all of us who are spending all day in that digital environment, and kind of know that it's a dangerous place out there. But after a while, like everything else, we tend to get complacent.
Yeah, I mean, I've read essays by cybersecurity experts, and you know, about their first-person accounts of falling victim to a phishing attack. So it happens to, you know, it happens to everyone, which is really scary.
Look, I used to ask my students. I used to ask my students, like, at the very first day of class, when it's like, so tell me the stupidest thing you've ever done. And, you know, everybody's faces would become a little bit embarrassed, and then people would like air it, and everybody would sort of feel like, okay, you know what, we're all human, but it's really important to recognize cybersecurity professionals are humans too. So there's a lot to learn there about how, you know, your average user who isn't spending all their day in a security operations center is going to operate as well.
Right. What are your thoughts about deepfakes' role in cyber threats?
Yeah, you know, I think I feel like there's a bit of a hype cycle around deepfakes. They can be, you know, very compelling. I think in the longer term, you know, there is, again, a cat and mouse game between organizations that are like Adobe, trying to create a kind of a visual imagery authentication regime, I'll call it that, which is, you know, somewhere partly technical, partly different kinds of validation. I do feel like, you know, it's pretty scary to see a deep fake visual of a person saying something that they didn't say. But it's also in some ways, I mean, well, actually, let me take a step back, Mark. Maybe there's a bigger point to make here, which is that sometimes the cybersecurity community, with all due respect, these are my colleagues and friends, and myself sometimes when I get sloppy, will kind of index on the really exciting, scientifically interesting and intriguing vectors of attack. Like a very sophisticated, when in fact, most of the attacks we face are pretty low tech, simple, cheap stuff. I mean, if I can break into the bank with a crowbar, why am I gonna like spend a lot of time trying to create a laser beam, you know, that can burn down the vault door or something like that.
Right.
So
yeah.
You know, I don't want to say these high tech attack vectors aren't important. They are, but attackers go for the weakest link, and if the weakest link is easy, then the deepfake thing is going to be a bit of a distraction more than it's going to be important.
And so I imagine this kind of thinking about giving different ways to different kinds of attacks goes into your scenario planning. Could you talk a little bit about your scenario planning methodology around cybersecurity?
Yeah. So so I come out of, I learned and trained and practiced scenario methodologies out of kind of what was one time a sort of a sister or maybe even a competitor organization, IFTF. I learned it all at the Global Business Network in the 90s. For those of you who know that community, it's called GBN. I had just moved to Berkeley to start my kind of traditional academic career. And it turned out that a guy living down the street from me was named Peter Schwartz, who had come from Shell to kind of start and broaden the scenario practice out to beyond the energy industry, and got involved at GBN in 1990 at the very early days and sort of stayed with it. Much of the way I think about it sort of comes out of that experience, Mark, which is I'd say, you know, two really, really crucial lessons. One is the future comes at us more quickly than we think. And I'm sure, you know, well, I shouldn't speak for you guys, but I bet your experience would agree. If you want people, organizations, whatever, to be thinking about the 5-year time horizon, you actually have to work at the 7-year time horizon. If you want them to be thinking about the 3-year horizon, you got to work at the 5-year horizon. If you want them to think about the 10-year horizon, you got to work at the 50, and so on and so forth. So the future is more urgent than we typically think it is. And that's true, never been more true than it has been in the digital environment, where things change more quickly than we typically imagine they will. The second thing I've learned from that experience, again, painfully obvious, is that simply giving people lists of things they have to worry about doesn't help. Your average CISO has a very, very long list of things that she's already worried about. One of the most important tools of foresight is to be able to say, these things you're worried about today, we can see how they might actually decline in importance as we go forward. And that the trick is going to be for you to be able to pivot efficiently and effectively from the old risk horizon to this new risk horizon. And the hardest decision you're ever going to have to make is when and how to sequence that pivot. And if scenario modeling can do anything, it can give you a set of indicators when you start to see these kinds of things happening in the environment. That's when you got to start that pivot, not a day sooner, not a day later. It's almost like a decision hygiene for taking things off the list and replacing them with other things. You can't just keep adding threats to what's already a too long list.
Mm-hmm. Do you have thoughts on how to get decision makers in an organization to act on foresight? That's always a challenge, I think.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think you know, a couple of thoughts about that. Yeah, no, one is the example I just gave. Like, you know, don't be catastrophic. Don't add more lists of problems to problems that are already intense and are already taking up people's attention. The second thing I've learned is, you know, these kind of, I'll call them kind of decision hygiene triggers, like when very specific empirically, when you see these kinds of things happen in the world, if it can be quantified, great. If it can't be quantified, render it in the same way kind of differential diagnosticians do in healthcare. You know, if you start to see someone complain about a pain in their back, that could mean this, or this, and then here's the next thing you do to determine which of those things it means. And then
and you were an MD, right?
Yeah. And I think that the third thing is, and the thinking is very similar. The third thing is, you know, crawl before you walk, before you run. Crawl before you walk, before you run, which is like, don't expect someone whose day job is about meeting quarterly targets to suddenly shift to spending a lot of their time thinking about the 10-year horizon. Create a kind of a decision and a behavior ladder where you can slowly but surely kind of reallocate your portfolio of attention. Because that's really what most decision makers are focusing, you know, are working with, a kind of a portfolio of attention. And look, I mean, with all due respect, I've seen people I love and adore and respect talk to decision makers in a little bit of a condescending way and say, you're focused on the short term, but the real threats are, no, the real threats are here and there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the opportunities are there too.
Talk a little bit about the importance of doing postmortems on foresight work, and doing systematic look at past scenarios to see what was missed. Is that something that you think is important in practice regularly?
I think it's really important. I don't think it's practiced enough. For obvious reasons. Nobody likes to go back and say, oh God, how did I miss this or that signal? Or why were we over indexing on this when this other thing was over here and we just didn't pay enough attention to it? And I think it is absolutely critical to do. Absolutely critical to do. Look, I mean, practice what I preach. I think it was in 2020 or 2021, when we did this original set of scenarios in CLTC in 2015 for the year 2020. I think sometime in mid 2020, I went back and looked carefully at the scenarios and the reasoning process that went into them and said, here we are in 2020. It's not a scorecard, like what did we get right, what did we get wrong? It's more, as you say, a postmortem of what were we seeing clearly and what were we not seeing clearly, and then most importantly, why? And then put it out there for the world to see. I published it on our blog, in our Medium blog, to say, like, okay, these are the things that we missed, and here's why we missed them. Can we tune up our kind of horizon scanning and our sensor mechanism to say, let's not make those same mistakes again? I think it was actually Esther Dyson, who maybe in the early 90s, maybe it was like it might have even been a tagline for her newsletter at that time, which said, make different mistakes, which I took to heart.
That's great.
Don't make the same mistake over and over and over again. And if you don't do the postmortem, guaranteed to make the same mistake again.
Right. Yeah. So the postmortem is you're getting feedback for course correction on your foresight process moving forward.
Yeah, and you're also learning about your own kind of mental and emotional hindrances. Like, what's stopping me from seeing that? It can't all be processed. Eventually, it's got to get down to the level of the individual sort of looking at their own mind and saying, why am I just ignoring those signals that are right in front of me? It sounds a little bit like a kind of a Buddhist psychotherapist, but there's some of that sort of self-awareness that really comes into what we pay attention to and what we don't pay attention to. And I do believe that human beings can get better at it. It just requires an awful lot of discipline and a huge amount of modesty, because looking back at the mistakes you made is never fun. It's never fun.
Exactly. I wanted to give you a couple of questions from the guests that we have, because it looks like we have about 20 minutes left. This is from Mitchell Weisberg, and it's a very practical question. As a small organization or individual, if we all keep data backed up on something like Dropbox, is that a reasonable defense against someone locking you out of your data?
Yeah. So, yeah, it's a very practical question and a very good one. And the answer, one to which the answer is easy. The answer is yes. Is it perfect? No. But here we are in 2022, and I'm going to ask even people on this call presumably are a little bit of selection bias towards folks who are a little bit more savvy about and wary of cyber threats. But do we all have comprehensive backups of our hard drives, off-site, in the cloud, and at home, and so on and so forth? Is it a perfect defense? No. Is it better than nothing? Absolutely. Are cloud services 100% guaranteed secure? No. Are they investing a lot more money and time than you are in their security? Yes. So most of us should be using cloud services for backups.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of like the don't roll your own crypto. It's like there's always going to be someone who's going to do a better job than you are at your security, and make use of those people who are spending all their time doing it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Mitchell. I hope that answered your question. Here's one from Lisa Abendroth, and she asks, how do you see cybersecurity risk changing in Web3 world, where users
Yeah.
own and manage more of their own data?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Maybe I'm gonna take a little bit of issue with the premise here that in Web3 world, users are actually going to end up managing and owning,
Mhm.
whatever that means, most of their own data. I know that blockchain has the capability to empower users to act that way, but I think we're very early in that progression, and I don't know, if we're going to see people actually take advantage of that opportunity. Look, you and I we could run our own web server on our if we wanted to. We could run our own email server if we want to. Most of us choose not to do that. We let Google do it for us, or AWS or somebody else. I think we have yet to see whether or not, or how many individuals are actually going to want to kind of manage their own data on a technology that, how can I say, at least right now, is a bit clunky and certainly not friendly from a user interface perspective. And look, I mean, we have data on this, right? I mean, like, how many people, even in the crypto world, use self-hosted wallets as compared to allowing Coinbase or FTX or somebody else to host their wallets for them? For better or worse, the digital environment has acculturated us all to liking those intermediaries that we like to say we hate.
It's so true, yeah. And in the crypto world, even Bitcoin, there are parts that are in theory decentralized, but you are always relying on all sorts of middlemen who can exploit systems. I had my own experience with that, with a Trezor hardware wallet that I had for my Bitcoin, and I forgot the PIN number, and so I was locked out of the Bitcoin that I had on it. But fortunately for me, unfortunately for other people, there was a security flaw in the firmware of the hardware wallet, and I was able to hire a 15-year-old kid in the United Kingdom to write exploit firmware from my hardware wallet so that I could retrieve my PIN code and recovery seed from the wallet and get my Bitcoin back. But I mean, good for me, but as soon as humans touch anything, insecurities arise.
Bad. I mean, I'm glad you got your money back, Mark. Bad for you, though, in terms of what it, I mean, bad in a good sense, in that
Yeah.
it's an important lesson. People sort of talk, I think, a little bit blithely sometimes about the blockchain and security. And blockchains have some really, really interesting security features. And most of what we do in blockchain world involves off-chain activities. So let's not confuse, the Fort Knox for the dollar bill that's sitting on my desk here, in upstate New York. They are the same. They may be the same thing, but one is in Fort Knox and one's sitting on my desk.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Here is a really good question from Laura Ward. What's your daily research routine that helps you set up strong security scenarios?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I learned, and I continue to practice in doing scenario work is, and it's easier said than done, is to keep in mind the kind of the mindset that it's the really interesting kind of attack scenario, the really interesting dynamics that sort of change the landscape are usually not right at the center of the concentric circle of what we're thinking about. So at GBN, we used to have this bullet chart. I don't know if you guys use the same thing, where we'd have like the center circle is like me or my organization. Then we talk about another circle, which we called the transactional environment, which are like all the people, organizations with whom we do transactions. And then we had a third circle called the contextual environment, which is the kind of big global drivers that shape all that other stuff. And I try to spend at least a third of my day in that outside circle, talking about, social, technological, economic, environmental, political, military drivers that aren't sort of like narrow security features, but that condition the environment in which we have to carry out our security protocols. And if I'm spending less than 30% of my time in that contextual space, then I'm probably not seeing the forest for the trees.
Right. That's great. Okay, another question. This is from Heather Galbraith. She said, I'm really interested in the decision hygiene for what comes on and off the list. Can you give us an example of how to identify the indicators or signposts?
Yeah. So I think it's a really hard thing to do, Mark, in kind of a general sense of like, this is a general way of modeling when people are spending, too much time worrying about relatively low probability or kind of low impact risks. So, I wish I had a general answer to that question. I think that it's really has to be kind of customized to particular organizations and particular people, because they just operate at different time frames. I mean, some people naturally want to spend time thinking about low probability, high impact scenarios. Some people naturally want to spend time kind of more in the middle of that space, thinking about the moderate probability, moderate impact scenarios. And if there's one lesson I've learned that maybe does have some general applicability, it's make sure that your team has a mix of those types of people in it and that they respect each other.
Interesting. And do you find that in your experience, are there certain people who gravitate towards those classes of issues?
Yeah, I think so. And, maybe, I don't know, just like making this up as we talk, maybe there's a way to, as you get to know people, you learn that about them. Maybe there's a way to accelerate that process by kind of giving people some kind of an assessment about where their kind of risk lenses naturally tend to lie because of how they grew up, or what the kind of configuration of their blood is, or something like that. People are really different in that regard.
Yeah.
And maybe you assess it by looking at their investment portfolios, and you kind of extract from that some point of view about what their natural kind of risk horizon is. There's a lot of tools out there that will help you evaluate yourself or other people as to what your risk tolerance is. But in the kind of stuff we're talking about, it's not just, I'm risk tolerant versus risk acceptant. It's a lot about what your risk horizon is, what the timeline is that you worry about and think about. And I think Michael, or maybe, it was Michael made the point, like diversity of those perspectives in a group is super important. And it only works, again, if people respect that diversity and don't look down their nose at others who say like, I hear you, Steve, you're talking about 2025, but right now I am so focused on what's going to happen in September 2022. I don't have time to worry about that. And like, we need to coexist and balance each other, not look down our nose at each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, foresight is best played as a group activity for sure. Okay, so let's see. We're getting close to time. Here's one from Sarah Nightingale. And she asks, in your scenario work, do you explore the key drivers of cyber threat? If so, what are the big ones? And were there any that surprised you?
Yeah. So naturally, we kind of spend a lot of time thinking about those kind of deep drivers. And like, it's very, very easy to obsess about the technology or the inadequacies of our technology infrastructure. We like to push a little bit sort of behind that and ask, how did we get there? A lot of that has to do with the economic incentives of the way we've kind of managed our digital economy. I think we spent a lot of time the last couple of years thinking about where the attackers are and what their motivations are. That's obviously changed over the last couple of years very dramatically, in ways that probably point to the rise of state-based attacks, a little bit less maybe attention to cause hacktivism, and criminal gangs who are sort of like almost purely economic, in their incentive structures. I think, like, we're likely to see it, and we were talking about this earlier with regard to, say, abortion and anti-abortion activists, a kind of a re-emergence of cause hacktivism, including domestic cause hacktivism here in the United States, where it's an obvious tool for people to attack each other across the red-blue divide, if you want to kind of think about it that way. And of course, one of the things that I think is on people's minds now very clearly is, all right, if we're going to have a meaningful or maybe even a significant recession that's going to lower investment rates, and generally bring economic pain to this country and others over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, who does that benefit? Does that benefit the attackers? Does it benefit the defenders? And where and how? So, it's just an example of the kind of things that we try to kind of think about, those slightly deeper causes and how they change in the environment in which we're living. It's, again, hard to carve out the attention time from people who are in that day-to-day emergency room environment of security operations centers. But I feel like everybody functioning in that environment either needs to spend part of their day in that sort of contextual space, or they need to have some people in their organization whose full-time job it is to do that.
Okay. I think we have time for one more question. This is from Will Thornton. And Will asks, where should next generation cybersecurity professionals focus their energy? What skills or certifications do you think will be vital?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. For years, I think we've been, in the cybersecurity world, we've been talking about the deficit of human talent. I think it was maybe around 2017 or so, 2018 at Berkeley, we decided to kind of wade into that and start a online master's in cybersecurity program, which we've been really delighted and surprised by the level of interest in that program. But I think the most important piece of it, Mark, that sort of stood out for me in an answer to the question is, as much as purely technical skills are needed, that's not what CISOs are telling us they want to hire for. They want to hire for people who have and can build those technical skills, but they also desperately need people who kind of have a thrill of the chase mindset. And I actually think that, like, inculcating and educating for how to tune those instincts is a really, really important part of the cybersecurity professional's challenge. I mean, I sort of don't understand why this isn't the sexiest job out there right now, because, it involves working with technology systems, it involves working with human beings, but it also involves being able to kind of crawl into the mindset of the adversary and look for signals that your understanding of their mindset is actually right or wrong, and tune that up over time. So I think that's a really, really important part. I mean, an absolutely crucial part of the cybersecurity professionals kind of training and mindset. The very first course that we offer and actually require in our master's program is called Cybersecurity in Context. And it's everything but technology. So, again, I'm not trying to like, pitch our program, but instead of saying, okay, we're going to teach you all the technical skills, and then at the end, we're going to teach you about like how it all happens in a political environment, or how it happens in the organization, we reverse that and start at the front. Understand everything else that happens in the context first. Yeah, gamers, absolutely. Understand that context first, and then build your technical skills around your understanding of that context. That's where I think the profession is going.
I love that. And I love that about you want people who are attracted to the thrill of the chase. And that I watched a while ago a video of a panel you moderated where it was a woman who, I can't remember her name, but she's like has a pretty high level position at Intel in cybersecurity. And her background was as a DJ at a jazz radio station.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah. Look,
Yeah,
I mean,
and
it's one of the great things about the cybersecurity profession. I mean, people come from they come from everywhere. And that's actually good. That's actually good.
yeah, I think so. Well, Steve, we are at time right now. This has been amazing talking to you. Really fascinating conversation. And I want to thank you for the time you've taken to share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, no, it's really a pleasure, and always great to see IFTF forging ahead. Thank you for everything you guys do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. And to our guests, I just want to let you know that we do these Foresight Talks every month, and we have a couple of great ones coming up. And to find out about them, just go to iftf.org/Foresight Essentials. I believe that's the URL. If that's not right, just go to iftf.org and you'll be directed where to go. Thank you so much, everyone. Steve, thanks again. I really appreciate it. And good luck with all of your work at Breakwater and elsewhere.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.